Hey guys, it's Mrs. Horner again. Sorry I didn't get this video up sooner, but I'm going to read chapter 6 of our book. Remember, we're reading My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List. And in the last chapter, we learned what the word liquidation means. They liquidated the Krakow ghetto, meaning they were starting to clear out that place where everybody was living. So we are on to chapter 6, and it is called the Plazau concentration camp. If you remember, right at the end, you find it here. The last sentence said, "We assembled by the gates of the ghetto and set out on the forced march to Plazau concentration camp." Okay, so that's where they're forcing her and her family, Rena and her family, to go. Children under the age of 10 were not allowed in the Plazau camp. Instead, before Jewish parents left on the march to Plazau, police forced them to send their young children to the Krakow ghetto's orphanage. Some parents tried to bring their little children with them to Plazau by giving them a sleeping pill and hiding them in backpacks. My cousin Jenny was too big to hide in a backpack, but I was desperate to bring her with us to Plazau. Even though the concentration camp would be terrible, at least if we were together, I could look after her. An idea came to me. I would hide her under my long coat. As my mother and I approached the gates of the ghetto, a policeman saw Jenny's feet under my coat. He opened the coat and looked at my beautiful little cousin, who was clearly less than 10 years old. "You can't take her," he said. "She's too young. She must stay here. Let the orphanage take care of her." My mother and I knew some of the people who ran the orphanage and told ourselves Jenny would be fine staying with them. What choice did we have? I took Jenny by the hand, and together we walked back inside the ghetto. It was only a few blocks, down empty streets, past empty buildings. We arrived at the orphanage. Several hundred children had been assembled outside the building. I recognized the woman supervising them. She was a friend of my mother. "Don't worry," she told me, taking Jenny by the hand. "I will take care of her." I kissed Jenny goodbye and walked back to join my mother by the gates of the ghetto for the 2-mile march to Plazau. Police started the march, and just as we began walking away from the ghetto, we heard gunshots. I felt a terrible chill. Surely the shots were coming from someplace else, not the orphanage. But as we continued toward Plazau, someone came up and whispered that the children in the orphanage were being murdered. Could it be true? My mother and I walked on, speechless, too shaken to say anything. Dogs barked, and the Nazi security police, known as the SS, yelled, "Mach schnell! Hurry!" We quickened our pace and marched to Plazau, still hearing shots being fired inside the ghetto. We arrived at the Plazau camp, which was a total size of about 100 city blocks. There were 88 barracks in the camp, housing about 25,000 inmates, all of them Jews. When we arrived, police divided Jews from the Krakow ghetto into groups and marched them to their assigned barracks. My mother and I were pushed into a crowded barrack with bunk beds 3 tiers high, like wooden shelves too narrow to sit up in. Apart from the barracks, Plazau had one filthy latrine, which is another word for a bathroom, that was always overflowing, a clinic that never had any medical supplies, and workshops where prisoners labored each day. We adjusted to the daily routine. At 4 o'clock in the morning, guards made a young musician from Krakow play his bugle to wake us. Prisoners ran outside and stood at attention for hours while roll call was taken. This was in winter, and many mornings were freezing cold. German officers went up and down the lines of prisoners. If one person was missing, the roll call had to be taken again, and we were forced to stand for more hours, often in rain or snow. There were sick people among the prisoners who could not stand for long, but if they sat down, it meant they were not strong enough to work, and guards dragged them off to be killed. We were always hungry in the Plazau camp. Hungry, as most people understand that word today, is different from hungry in a concentration camp. Hungry in a camp meant a twisting, painful sensation in your stomach that made you dizzy and weak and never went away. Our hope was that there would be enough food to keep us alive until the next morning. Our food was also not food as most people understand that word. Food in a concentration camp meant a foul-smelling bowl of watery soup and a piece of stale bread. Throughout the day, we were always looking for something more to eat. We were ready to eat anything. Guards stood by the garbage piles outside the inmate kitchen and shot any desperately hungry prisoner who dared to dig through the garbage for scraps. The commandant of Plazau camp was a German officer named Amon Get. It's spelled kind of weird, but it says it's pronounced Get. We heard that Get had grown up in Vienna, the cultural capital of Austria, so we hoped he would be a reasonable man. He turned out to be just the opposite. He was horrible and inhuman. Amon Get was 6 feet 4 inches tall, overweight, and brutal. Everyone in the camp knew his reputation and stayed as far away from him as possible. He lived in a villa on a hill about 100 yards from the main gates of Plazau. Each morning he stood on the balcony of his villa, aimed his rifle at people coming and going inside the camp, fired his gun, and killed prisoners at random. My uncle Roman worked as a painter in Plazau. One morning the guards put him to work painting one of the barracks. Amon Get came to inspect the work. He looked at the barrack, then drew his pistol and shot and killed my uncle. Roman had done nothing to provoke him. Get had no reason to kill my uncle other than his disdain for human life. Prisoners who had been in Plazau for some time told us Get never ate his breakfast without shooting at least one person first. Killing made him happy. Some days, Get forced us to witness prisoners being murdered. These poor people may have been guilty of some minor offense, such as stealing potato peels out of the garbage, but it didn't matter. They were Jews, and that was reason enough for Get to have the guards kill them. Life in the Krakow ghetto had been harsh, but that was nothing like what we saw in Plazau, where every day Commandant Get committed terrible acts. Thankfully, during that terrible year in Plazau, I began hearing the name Oskar Schindler. All right, that is the end of chapter 6. So she kind of gave us a description of what it was like in the Plazau camp, which was awful, as you can imagine. They were killing the Jewish people for really no reason at all. It's very sad, but this is a true account of what happened when this little girl was there. So our next chapter is chapter 7, and it's fairly long. These chapters are all about the same length. So I think we're going to get to hear more about Oskar Schindler and what he did. That will be coming up next. So I hope you guys are enjoying this story. I will continue to post the videos for each chapter, hopefully each one a day. But for now, I hope you're enjoying the story, and I miss you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.